only the top YouTubers truly understand that getting people to click on your thumbnail is the difference between 10 views and 10 million views. So let's go over the insane psychological tricks that the biggest YouTubers use. I've been obsessing over YouTube thumbnails for over a decade now, popularized some of the most popular thumbnail formats on the platform, and I've worked alongside the biggest creators in the industry. And the biggest. Now, the most important part of your thumbnail without a question is the actual idea, because if the idea is garbage, well, you can only polish that so much. If your video is something basic like you went shopping today, you played a game of Fortnite, etc., the thumbnail will naturally be an extension of that and be pretty mediocre. That's why the biggest YouTubers will actually reverse engineer everything from the idea. And once you have that, the thumbnail and title will naturally just be awesome. But of course, there's also many other things to consider that will make or break your thumbnail, like taking into account what is called the curiosity gap. So for instance, if I showed you something that asked a question, I think this is a great example and it's definitely been used in a lot of case studies, but this video by Veritasium, why is there 96 million black balls on this reservoir? This is his most viewed video on his entire channel, and it illustrates the curiosity gap extremely well. It literally asks the question, and then of course the viewer, anyone seeing this, sees the absurdity of this, goes, why is there that many black balls on this reservoir? And then they click the video to fill in that gap. However, if you give the answer to that gap, which a lot of people do, the gap is closed. You don't want to give the answer away because then there's no reason to click the video. Now, the next thing I consider is the scroll stopping pattern, or the interrupt. Basically, how well does your thumbnail stop a viewer scrolling? There's a few good ways to think about this, but one of the things that's really stuck with me throughout my career is the half a second rule. So literally just pull up your thumbnail and flash it on the screen for half a second. Do you understand what's going on in the thumbnail? If you don't, then it's probably not a good thumbnail. Because when viewers look at thumbnails, they don't sit there and analyze it, they just glance at it. And you do this by having clean composition, a clean idea, and also it should contrast well against the competition, i.e. the purple cow factor that I've talked about in the past. The better your thumbnail and video is at differentiating itself from the competition in a good way, the more it is going to tap into that scroll stopping behavior. Something that will also help with this is understanding color theory. Some of the key pillars of understanding color theory for thumbnails is like things like brights attract. Your eyes naturally scan and go towards the brightest thing on the image. So these are the things that are going to attract attention first. Just think of people like we're moths attracted to the bright part in the image. Next, you want to think about contrasting colors, things that are the opposite of the color or are complementary colors. So for instance, if you have something that is bright red as a subject in the image, well, you don't really want to do a background that's orange or something like that, right? Because it's going to blend in. However, if you do a background that's blue or green, it is going to push your attention towards that contrasting color. Now, you also have to be careful with this because you need to understand why you're doing it and why you're bringing attention to certain focal points of the image. If you just start spamming a bunch of contrasting colors, it's going to look like a bunch of nonsense. Another good thing to know about color theory is that the white background usually wins most of the time. This is contextual and it can change in your niche, but most of the time the white background wins because it's just brighter. It brings more attention to your thumbnail. And lastly, on the colors bringing you to a focal point, again, like if you wanted people to look at the object someone's holding and then you put a bunch of bright colors around it, even though you're technically contrasting the colors against that image or that subject, the focal point isn't going towards that subject because it's drowned out. Also, a really good hack that a lot of people have figured out by now is that faces are pretty good for thumbnails, especially if it's a well-polished photograph and you are like directly looking into the camera and making eye contact. Bonus points if your face is actually upping the value of the emotion of the thumbnail. Pretty self-explanatory, but yeah, humans are designed to scope out and actually see eye contact just as like a survival mechanism. So you're kind of tapping into that psychology here a little bit, and you're utilizing that function that humans have to get them to scan and see your thumbnail with a big face with big eyes looking at you. And obviously you can tell a bunch of YouTubers always use their face in the thumbnail, which also could be used for branding, but it's just good as well. Which I guess will bring us into our next topic, the brand understanding. You might think there's a one size fits all for thumbnails, but there really isn't. And if you like look at a bunch of different niches, the strategy and the formulas are completely different. Like for example, if you look at a Mr. Beast or adjacent type channel, they're all trying to optimize for the biggest spectacle possible. What's the craziest thing that I can do? What's the most insane psychological thing I can do? And let's show that. Usually there's absolutely no text unless it's like to convey a bunch of money or something. But the entire story is told visually. But if you look at a niche like podcasts, text-heavy thumbnails are the meta. And they actually utilize the text in a way that plays off the curiosity gap. Again, it says something that makes you want to click the video and find out the answers. Going even further on this, again, you have maybe like art niches or data analysis niches. It really depends on your niche, and you want to fit your thumbnail style towards that. Like you don't want to be a data analysis channel and then your thumbnail like looks like a gaming montage that just doesn't make any sense. Bring it back to the Veritasium video, we see exactly that. You see the curiosity gap with the question, and then the second you click on the video, it's showing all these balls get dropped into the lake and the reservoir. So it's confirming the promise that it made.
These are shade balls.
But now let's talk about one of the things that almost no one thinks about, and that's the visual hierarchy of the thumbnail. Now we touched on a few adjacent points of this, but the way I like to think about visual hierarchy in a thumbnail is the fact that we like to look at things from the top left and then scan accordingly. So we go top left, then maybe top right, then we go bottom left, middle, and then we finish at the bottom right. And what that means for you and your thumbnails obviously is you want to put the most important information on the left side of the thumbnail, or at least at the top and middle parts of the thumbnail. A lot of the times you can just follow a pretty simple format like a rule of thirds and be pretty well off. Like just have a big face on the 1/3 on the right, and then the left side, the 2/3 on the left side take up your main focal point, and it's probably gonna look pretty decent. What also plays into this is the fact that the YouTube time bar is in the bottom right, and most people actually just never even think about this. But if you're putting one of your focal points in the bottom right, not only is it just not gonna be the first thing that people naturally scan towards, the time bar is literally blocking it in a lot of instances, especially if it's really small, like in the suggested bar of on desktop. Large portions of your thumbnail will literally be covered up. So that's why you want to optimize everything away from this part of the thumbnail. Learning photography and compositions is actually really important for thumbnails and videos, and it's something that's helped me out a ton. And another point on this that I see a bunch of smaller YouTubers always falling into the trap is that there's way too much clutter. They just want to like give you all of the information in the thumbnail, and what they do is they end up putting so much stuff on the thumbnail that you just don't know where to look. There's no clear visual hierarchy, and when that happens, when there's a bunch of noise and a bunch of stuff on the thumbnail, you just check out and you just scroll past it. You want clear focal points, and that either can be 1, 2, or 3 things. Anything more than that, you are probably not going to have the best thumbnail. And that also means that empty space isn't a negative thing. Well, it actually is literally called negative space, but it's not always a negative. You could even fill it in smartly with just a little bit of texture, just a little bit of decoration to not make it feel extremely empty. But having that negative space is crucial towards, again, focusing your attention towards the focal points that you actually want the viewer to process immediately. And you can also do this by using leading lines, a concept where you use lines, whether just literal lines or horizontal type lines in the design, to guide your attention towards the point you want to see. The last thing I'll say on visual hierarchy as well is adding depth to your thumbnail is also really good, because it gets rid of that Photoshop kind of amateur feel, and you can just fit in so much more context with depth, and it just makes it feel more real and alive. Now, another thing that really big YouTubers take advantage of that most smaller YouTubers never even consider is not just A/B testing, but also changing past thumbnails. Obviously, A/B testing is good because you can figure out which thumbnail is actually working with cold hard data. The only problem or setback with this is the data can be a bit misleading. There's a lot of there's a lot of invisible variables that, you know, change the click-through rate, change the average view duration of a given viewer. So it's really hard to actually look at this data and make concrete judgments off of that because sometimes the data can actually be inversed of the reality. Like an interesting concept I read about this was the fact that with YouTube's A/B testing features, it optimizes for watch time per viewer. But the problem is that usually the thumbnail that's less optimized, so it does worse with cold audiences and viewers who aren't typically watching your channel, that worse thumbnail will get viewed more by your diehard viewers. And because it's getting watched by your diehard viewers, it doesn't actually reflect well in the thumbnail. It's just that they're your diehard viewers and they're going to watch your video regardless. And so your average view duration is actually way higher because those are your most valuable viewers. It doesn't really differentiate between the context of the viewers. So take that with a grain of salt. But the second part, changing your past thumbnails, this is just a major W every single YouTuber should be taking advantage of. It might not always be the best use case of your time if the past video is just not really that good, isn't really getting any views, there's just really no point. But the point with that is maybe changing the thumbnail could make that video into a good video or a good performing video, and you just don't know because the thumbnail isn't good. But especially for past videos that are performing pretty decent or are still getting a steady stream of impressions, if your thumbnail is objectively weak, you should just change it and you're probably going to see the views and impressions explode. And it's one of my favorite things to do because the return on investment is so large. You literally just change the picture. You don't have to remake the video, you don't have to do anything other than just changing the picture, and you could literally just start getting thousands, millions of more views. It's a no-brainer. But something I rarely see a lot of YouTubers do, and it's something I do every single time I make a thumbnail, is to think about the thumbnail being small. Think about it being tiny. Think about it being shown on different platforms, because that greatly changes how it's perceived. If a thumbnail is on TV, it's way different than on your phone, or it's way different on the suggestion bar on your desktop. So what I do is I actually have all of these different formats where the thumbnail will get shown, and I put it into each of these categories and I compare it against the competition, and I just see how well it checks off all of these boxes. Okay, can I understand it when it's tiny like this? Yes. Now, what about the thumbnail title relationship? A lot of people don't really know what to do with this, and a lot of the times they just end up basically repeating the same thing in the thumbnail and title. But typically what you'll want to do is create tension together, utilize them both together to create that curiosity gap and not just repeat the same premise twice. So for example, the biggest culprit you'll see of this is when people have a title and then they have the thumbnail and then the title is like literally repeated in the thumbnail with text. This happens all the time. I see it all the time. But again, there's no point of that. It would be much better if you just change that text to something else, maybe a question of some sort or some sort of statement that adds on to the curiosity gap. It doesn't layer the same exact thing. It positions itself adjacent so that it can build up that curiosity gap with the title. They should work in tandem. There's an old marketing term called direct response advertising, and this was discovered like many decades ago. But basically the core premise was that it is the main purpose of an advertisement to catch that attention. Whatever you have to do to catch that attention is the most important, and quote unquote decorating on top of that doesn't contribute to the response. Instead, it just dilutes the attention that you gave it and it doesn't actually help you. But I think we need to go a layer past this and think about it like I don't want to say just a linear or trade-off line, because there are different dimensions to it. To keep it simple, I'm going to put it like this. I think there is, on one end of the spectrum, the direct response advertising's core insight, right? Get the attention at all costs necessary. This is a big part of the thumbnail. But on the other hand, you have the actual inclination to click and basically the curiosity gap, right? You could also put a bunch of other things like brand longevity and so on. But the main reason I'm saying this is because you can't solely optimize for the attention. You know, the insight that you're doing everything to get the attention, that's extremely valuable, but you can't just abandon everything else in terms of serving this philosophy, in my opinion. I think I can illustrate this with a pretty good example. I think I could put a thumbnail that's gonna get you to stop and get your attention, which falls in line with this philosophy, right? But that doesn't mean I'm gonna get you to click on the video or wanna be a long-term viewer of the channel. Those are very different things. So when I'm thinking of the a thumbnail, you have to take into consideration all of these factors and weight them in terms of importance. And I think that's where it really starts to get complicated, because you want to find that sweet spot where you are optimizing for the attention as hard as you can. You're doing everything to get the attention of the viewer, but you're also doing everything to make it as curiosity inducing as possible. And those are two different things, and they don't always overlap, and they can overlap. So if you do have a video, you do have a topic where they both are in sync, where getting the attention at all costs also plays into the curiosity gap, well then that's a very good video and you should obviously do it. But again, there's levels, there's trade-offs that you have to consider. One of those being thumbnail fatigue. This can be within your own content and formulas, or also just the niche that you're operating in as a whole. For example, I mean, I think you can think of like drama videos. They are notorious for this. You just have the picture, you have it's over, you have the end, you have, you just do the same format over and over and over and over, and it works. So you should definitely keep repeating it. But after a certain point, if it doesn't remain fresh enough, if it doesn't remain novel enough, you're gonna have a bunch of those viewers start to fall off. So that's another example of, again, you're optimizing for attention, you're grabbing their attention, but you might not be optimizing for long-term viewer engagement, and that's gonna start having its negative consequences. Now, something I left for the end, and I guess I could have put this in one of the other subcategories, but it's the fact that your thumbnail should optimize for action, something about to happen, over static. The best thumbnails imply a narrative, and especially something insane about to unfold. So for example, one of the thumbnail formats that I heavily popularized was the shark attack thumbnail. You have a person swimming in front of the camera, or even like in a cage or something, and a shark is coming up right behind them. Now, obviously, I don't think I need to explain this. That is a mid-action shot. It looks like something insane is literally about to happen, and you can apply this to really any niche. The most insane basketball shot's about to happen. The most insane sport incident's about to happen. The most insane car crash is about to happen. It doesn't matter, but being in the action is so much better than a static retelling of the story. Now, again, some niches do have to go this static route, and that's just the way it is. But if you can go action over static, you should. Okay, my last piece of advice for you. This is something not a lot of people talk about or mention in terms of having really good thumbnails, getting really good click-through rate and all that stuff. And that is just to be consistent. Sometimes it is smarter, and actually a lot of times it is smarter to optimize for quantity over quality. I have a really good example for this, but the obvious point being is that it helps regular return viewers build a habit of watching your videos, and this naturally increases the metrics of your click-through rate and your watch time. This has everything to do with building an actual community. I want you to think about your actual habits. If you see a video and it's a really good video, but you've never watched the person before, that means you're a cold viewer, and there's a much less likely chance you're gonna click on the video, even if it's an exceptionally well-made thumbnail and packaging. But if you have this YouTuber who you constantly watch, let's say he uploads once a day and you watch him all the time, and the thumbnail and topic aren't that good and they're just really not that interesting, it doesn't matter if you have the habit and want to go watch him anyway, you're gonna click on it. And well, YouTube just takes this as the signal, oh, this viewer clicked this video, it's a good video, the click-through rate's going up, all these metrics are going up. But that's an invisible metric. If you actually build a community of people who want to come and watch your videos on repeat, that is going to raise all of your metrics almost invisibly. And that's something that a lot of people don't talk about. That's a huge advantage big channels have. They could have a group of 100,000 people ready to watch every single video they post, and you only get that by consistently putting out good content that people want to return to. But if that's not enough to convince you of that, this example probably will. You may have heard of the famous classroom example where I believe it was a bunch of pottery students, and basically the teacher split them up into two groups. And this is a real story, by the way, this isn't some random folklore. But yeah, the classroom got split up into two groups. One was tasked with learning everything about pottery and making the perfect pot at the end of the semester. And then the other group was tasked with just create a bunch of pots. It doesn't matter how good it is, just create a bunch of them. And what they found is that the group that just put out a bunch of pots regardless of quality ended up being the better pottery makers at the end of the semester. So that doesn't exactly line up with the community building aspect I'm talking about, but I hope that helps you understand that you shouldn't really sweat it too much with the quality of your thumbnails right now. The point is you should be thinking about it, doing it, and then learning from that feedback and then adjusting accordingly. That's the thing to pull from that example. That is my entire thought process for creating thumbnails. Of course, I couldn't go over every minute minutia. If there's any really good tips that have helped you that I missed, please put them in the comment section down below so we can all learn from it. And also just thank you for the kind words on my past 2 videos. I do appreciate it. And I do plan on continuing to put out the best information I possibly can. So if you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe to not miss out on that. And I'll see you in my next video.